is coming in the wag of a lamb's tail.
Do you all have any guns?
Nope.
Rah!
So, how did we get here? I was building this up for a while, and I was going to save this for February where it would be more appropriate, but December pretty much destroyed my views, and Adventure Time seems to be the only thing people care about on this channel, so might as well. I'll have to do something else for February then. Which, yeah, I might as well make this a series. I'm going to go through particular Adventure Time characters, and note and point out their plots and development to really analyze their character and their own character arcs. And yeah, tree trunks. Why would I make a video on tree trunks of all characters? Well, despite seeming like just a simple one-off character, Tree Trunks has so many weird, and I mean weird, things done with her through pretty much everything from one-off storylines to backstory to even main plot importance. And again, it's so weird! I think someone needs to actually address it. Like, please someone, this is driving me insane, I need to talk to someone about this! So, Tree Trunks is introduced to us by episode 4, aptly named Tree Trunks. Ignore this part in the first episode.
Tree Trunks, get those hot buns in here, girl.
Oh, I hope it's not bad news.
And we don't really get an introduction to her as it starts with Finn and Jake playing with their swords. Which, fun fact, is the first time we ever see Finn's sword, Scarlet, and it's weird it took this long to see it. Also, Jake's sword, which is rarely seen only once more 2 seasons later.
I'm gonna eat it all before you even get there.
So, we never see how Finn and Jake met Tree Trunks, but considering how she's considered a Candy Kingdom resident, even though she lives in a cottage in the outskirts, it's likely that Finn and Jake helped her out a while ago and formed a nice grandmotherly relationship. And yeah, that's pretty much Tree Trunks' character, of a kind, southern, grandmotherly figure who treat Finn and Jake like their grandkids and invites them for pie. She's super sweet, well aside from this one weird part.
Guys wanted it, they can have it.
And yeah, Tree Trunks' defining characteristic is that she's really good at baking pies. Surprise for a person without fingers, but I guess a trunk would help. Though, it's weird how she's just a random tiny elephant in the Candy Kingdom, but it is explained much later. And yeah, everyone remembers this episode as Finn and Jake help her through the scary dark forest to get the Crystal Gem Apple. And we do get some more characterization of Tree Trunks, where we see her naivety and goodwill, even when faced with threats and just how out of their league going on this adventure is. Even Finn gets worried and angry whenever she gets into danger and he has to save her. Plus also quotes me whenever I try to get the hard mode in Terraria.
Ugh, you're gonna get it, wall of flesh!
But we also see a bit of that flirtatious grandma part of her, which, yeah, is worth to see, but it's a lot more important later on. And this episode really highlights Finn's and Tree Trunks' bond more than any other episode, where it's actually pretty sweet. And yeah, despite her naivety getting herself and others into danger, she does help them find the Crystal Guardian's weakness. And she finally gets to eat the Crystal Apple and... What the f***? Yeah, this ending came out of nowhere and is super infamous. Hell, I know someone who stopped watching the show because of it and said, I stopped watching after that freaking elephant exploded. Now, we do get a small clip of her okay in some Crystal World happy, but even that has complications. So, I've heard varying things, but apparently it was the intention for Tree Trunks to die here, and the final clip and likely the follow-up was forcing them on the network since it was too dark. And honestly, I agree. Adventure Time is not meant to be shocking or cynical or anything, especially in season 1 where it didn't have any of the darker tone or atmosphere we get later on. It was the most lighthearted and fun season when it was just starting out. To have a character the audience gets to know and love, and it's pretty much as a sweet grandma, just to kill her off for no reason at the end for a sick joke, it really doesn't work. I mean, later they would, but not now.
I just woke up today.
Hello? I'm just gonna pretend you're sleeping.
And besides, with how much mileage this show got out of Tree Trunks, it's really for the best that they changed it. I mean, this video wouldn't really exist without it. And yeah, before we go to the next episode, I find it interesting to look back about how much Tree Trunk's characterization originated with her pretty much entirely being a timid, sweet, naive old lady who can't even comprehend danger most of the time and treats everything around her with a smile and goodwill. Which is funny because Tree Trunks later will become insanely standoffish and aggressive moving forward, but I'll get to that later. Ignore this part in the video, it's a production error. We finally get a resolution to that weird as hell ending in the season 2 episode, Crystals Have Power, which for the most part has little to do with Tree Trunks as ever being brought up briefly in the beginning. The main plot is that Finn is kidnapped by Steven Universe rejects to turn him into a crystal gem against his will, but Jake is too concerned with his traumatic past to do anything about it. But it's revealed Tree Trunks was behind all of this, eating the magical crystal apple and transporting her to the crystal dimension, giving her godlike power over it and being loved and worshipped by the crystal men. But it also turned her malevolent and insane, now wanting Finn as her lover. But Jake luckily kicks the gem apple out of her stomach, turning her back to normal. Now, at least after that, she understands how inappropriate she was, and she was driven insane by the apple's power, and only obsesses over Finn because she was so worried in the crystal dimension and thought of him for comfort. But it does get a little weird.
I think you're cute and I like you.
Yeah, let's not really think that hard about it. I'm just glad this never gets acknowledged again. Weird random anime song, go! And yeah, while this episode doesn't add too much to Tree Trunks with the limited screen time and insanity, we do get some of her polite southern grandma-isms, but more importantly, a bigger focus on a more flirtatious side, even if unwilling, which does become a bigger aspect later. Next time we see her is in Season 3's Apple Thief, where all the apples in her orchard are stolen and Finn and Jake need to find them. They look for clues, asking if Tree Trunks has any enemies.
Oh, Finn, I take great care to assure that I'm loved by even the most heinous.
Yeah, it's not gonna last long. But Jake finds Raggedy Princess! Hell yeah, Raggedy! She's the best princess, she's so heckin' cute and wholesome. Oh, it's so nice to see her. I wonder what she's doing here, but hey, some completely heartless fiend knocked her off her perch and into a ditch. And I guess she never got back up. And they never help her out either. What's wrong with them? What's she even doing here? It seems she was a scarecrow. Man, why is she doing that? Isn't she a princess? Why does she become a scarecrow in random places? Is she just that desperate for a purpose? Poor girl. I mean, man, she really needs friends. She doesn't deserve this. Okay, too much a tangent. This isn't a Raggedy Princess video, as much as I want it to be. They try to go to the randomly seedy parts of the Candy Kingdom, and Tree Trunks does show more how she's really not cut out for this rough and tough look in their guys. But more importantly, the episode does show Tree Trunks having a tad more of an aggressive streak than she did before, now with a much more standoffish attitude at the loss of her apples that's nothing like her oblivious good nature before when faced with threats. Also, they somehow get involved into a diamond smuggling scheme, and Finn and Jake really should be able to get out of her no problem. What the hell, guys? This is pretty pathetic. And they threaten to feed them all to the pig. Remember, this pig is important.
I'm sorry, y'all. They're making me do this. I'll try to make it quick.
Wait, how many candy people did they feed alive to Mr. Pig? But yeah, they easily escape and take the pig with them, as Mr. Pig helps them to find the apples and the day is saved. Well, after...
Pie.
She slapped my butt.
Again with the weird flirtiness. So yeah, this episode was a relatively normal Tree Trunks episode, well compared to the first two. Tree Trunks is back to normal and still has mostly the same characteristics, but with a bit more of an attitude, which we'll see will grow. Now, there is a cameo with her and Mr. Pig together in the Christmas episode, which is foreshadowing to the Season 4 episode, Dream of Love. I've noticed a trend of Tree Trunks getting a spotlight episode at least once per season. So, it's showing that Mr. Pig never really left Tree Trunks after Apple Thief, and the two have started a nice little romance together. A bit weird since Tree Trunks seems much older than Mr. Pig, but I guess he's into older women, or Tree Trunks must really be a flirty queen. And yeah, they start a steady relationship, though their public displays of affection start to really bother other people, which, okay, doesn't seem too bad, and damn, Tree Trunks is throwing it back like that! Man, she's taking that horny grandma energy to the extreme.
Cinnamon Bun, do something!
The concert is over!
That's not what a...
The concert's over, princess!
It was at this moment where Princess Bubblegum decided to get revenge on Tree Trunks for ruining her weird musical thing by sabotaging the most important day of her life in spite. But that's yet to come. And yeah, the two are annoying people with their public affection, which, okay, what are they even doing in these places? At this point it has to be intentional. They had to try to be there, to the point where Finn and Jake force them to separate, which then leads to the heartfelt duet, Dream of Love. A surprisingly well-performed and heartfelt song for the show to throw randomly. And especially Mr. Pig, like man, this dude's singing his heart out here, mad respect.
I'm still loving you, girl, from halfway across this great big world. And in my dreams, I'm holding hands with you.
And it moves them to reunite. Now, this is a really important episode of Tree Trunks, as Mr. Pig soon becomes a major character in their life, in a pivotal relationship for her. It also finally focuses that flirtatious energy she's had as their introduction to an actual sustainable relationship. So it's not weird anymore. Well, okay, it still is a little. Now, before I move on to the big one, I should talk about 5 more short Graybles, as she does get a small part in one of the roles, being so offended by what she thinks is a statue flicking her off. No, I'm not kidding. And she is so upset, she goes to the police to force them to do something about them, but gets even more upset by the police force inefficiency and decides to take matters into her own hand and forms a militia to destroy the statue, making actual weapons. Not good ones, but still. It's really important to note, as Tree Trunks, as shown before, has never had such a standoffish and aggressive attitude. Well, when she's not possessed. Before, she looked at threats and tried to pacify them as if they were nothing, but now she actively takes charge against things and forms what she at least thinks is a reasonable threat to take things down by force. It's a surprising character turn if you really think about it, and it gets really important later on. But the real important Tree Trunks episode of the season is Apple Wedding.
Then why don't you two just get married?
We don't want to rush
marriage
things.
is a
We
big
need
step.
time to get to know each other.
I guess a season is the amount of time it takes then. So yeah, Mr. Pig and Tree Trunks are finally tying the knot in arranging a wedding in the Candy Kingdom. And wow, Mr. Pig is a lot larger a family than you'd expect, especially since he said it was homeless. And we also see Tree Trunks has 3 ex-husbands, which wow does show she gets around. Kinda puts her flirtatious attitude in perspective. Only Wyatt is really interesting, and mostly because he's just the most pathetic man in the universe. He's kind of the Hans Moleman of Adventure Time.
Today, part 4 of our series of the agonizing pain in which I live every day.
And even more surprisingly, we see Tree Trunks' mother, which, one, I'm shocked he's still alive, and damn, she's somehow even thirstier than her daughter.
You're about to marry such a handsome, fine, saucy man. Oh, but he is a saucy, fine Bologna factory.
No wonder Tree Trunks is like this. Also, yeah, I did talk about this episode a lot in my PB video. And yeah, Tree Trunks doesn't think PB has the authority to give wedding vows, which I'm still not sure if she's completely right. It does show that she and pretty much everyone else believes King of Ooh. Granted, old people are much more easily scammed by people, so it checks out. Though King of Ooh does have some weird wedding vows.
And spend the next 5 years with me in my Serenity compound, performing simple household repairs.
What the hell? But yeah, PB takes this opportunity to completely sabotage the wedding and practically destroy it just to oust King of Ooh by some unseen beef that you have, even though it was completely qualified to perform the ceremony. And she arrests him out of spite. And then Tree Trunks calls out her blatant abuse of power and ruining her wedding, and our lovable princess responds by imprisoning 36 innocent people for it. It's really hilarious what she says to Tree Trunks in the beginning and what she does after.
Now listen, I don't want you to worry about a thing.
Oh, poor Tree Trunks.
But yeah, at least Tree Trunks does grow as a much stronger individual than before, now with a solid backbone and one of the few people in the entire series to call out PB on her horrible actions. And yeah, everyone's stuck in jail by the princess's temper tantrum, and Tree Trunks is apparently just gonna die?
Oh no. The elephant graveyard is calling me now. Okay, hold your horses, I'm coming.
What the hell? But Mr. Pig says they can hold the ceremony in here.
Did you do the honors?
Are you crazy? That loopy bird is gonna string me up sideways. You can perform your own dang ceremony. KingofOo.com!
I would say that PB publicly executing King Abu via hanging would be ridiculous, but no, she completely would. The girl's out for blood in these seasons. Wonder if they'd use licorice for ropes. And the two are forced to have their wedding in prison. And yeah, finally then does PB release the people she wrongfully incarcerated. But of course, we can't end this episode without Tree Trunks being insanely horny.
Know what I'm saying?
Wait, don't you think there might be cameras down here?
I hope so.
So yeah, while not being much of a big character development episode for Tree Trunks, it does reinforce some of the traits she's grown, like a stronger attitude and her romantic behavior, but more importantly, changes the status quo with her marriage to Mr. Pig. But I'd say the real important stuff happens in their next appearance. The Season 6 opener continues the main storyline of Adventure Time, where Finn tries to find his father, who's in a celestial prison, where they chase the Lich there who seeks to use the ancient horrors as an army to kill all life. And of course, it leads to this iconic scene.
Fall. There is only darkness for you, and only death for your people.
But Finn uses the celestial semen as a last resort, which instead revives the Lich, giving him new life with the rejuvenation, creating pretty much a new being. A weirdly ironic but fitting way to go out for the Lich. And yeah, with nowhere else to put this literal baby, they leave it at Tree Trunks' doorstep. And lucky, since Mr. Pig was about to become Tree Trunks' 4th ex-husband.
Mr. Pig, I think we should get a...
The Lich would be renamed Sweet Pea, which I thought was like Sweet Pea, but it's actually short for Sweet Pig Trunks, which is really weird, so I think it's the former. So yeah, Tree Trunks of all characters is now raising a rejuvenated primordial embodiment of death and destruction. Wow! And this would largely be Tree Trunks' main role for the rest of the series, barring some episodes we'll get to later. Their relationship is shown in detail in the episode Gold Stars later in the season, where Sweet Pea, despite his origins, is pretty much just a giant sweet little boy, ignorant of his true identity or the world around him. And Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig are very loving parents, comforting him when he gets nightmares and encouraging him to go to school and get an education, treating him exactly as if they were their own kid. And this is very important. We see, despite his evil origin, Sweet Pea is a very kind and loving person, even if very naive, but again, little kid. And it could be evident largely because of the love of his parents. Though I guess they, and definitely Finn and Jake, should have been a bit more attentive since Sweet Pea gets coerced by King Abu to work for him instead of going to school. Okay, now I can see why PB hates him so much. And yeah, he even resorts to threatening to burn down his parents' orchard unless he comes with them. Man, maybe he deserves to hang. But yeah, this pushes out the Lich in him instinctually in this really messed up scene and causes them to flee. Now, this is the first time the Lich has actually overwhelmed and taken over Sweet Pea, and could be completely devastating if it did. But remembering Tree Trunks' words from his nightmare earlier, he says to himself that it's just a dream, which is very important for later. So yeah, this episode is very important to the franchise, but also to Tree Trunks' character, now reinforcing her old grandmother personality and ways we saw in her earlier appearances, now actually to help raise the child herself and teach them to be kind and sweet themselves. Also, should talk a bit about the Elemental series where she does appear assimilated to the candy element. She and Mr. Pig got assimilated, but Sweet Pea didn't, potentially by his immense power as the Lich's reincarnation. And it's primarily just used to set up the unnerving states of the assimilation state, and just how screwed Ooh became in Finn and Jake's absence, with Sweet Pea terrified of what his parents had become and the loss of the world he once knew. Yeah, we should leave. But caring for Sweet Pea has been Tree Trunks' role in the series until our next starring episode in the Season 8 episode High Strangeness. So, Tree Trunks gets abducted by her great alien husband to see her half-dozen hybrid children in a mushroom-like spacecraft with a praying mantis and a leotard eating a carrot. What? Oh, you think I'm making this up? I wish I was making this up! You can't do this, Adventure Time! You can't pull this stuff off in Season 8 for a long-established character! How on earth did you think this was a good idea? When I say Tree Trunks gets bonkers, I mean it. I just don't understand the thought process. I really hate the writers must have been on drugs joke, but to come up with this, I feel the name High Strangeness was more evident than it seems. Okay, so after all of that, We also learn Tree Trunks still holds some resentment against Princess Bubblegum for ruining her wedding and likely giving her a criminal record. Honestly, can't blame her.
No, she whizzed on our wedding.
Tree Trunks is also the only character in Adventure Time history that acknowledges Princess Bubblegum's horrible actions and actually hates her for it. But yeah, PB is sending rockets of colonizing candy organisms into space, which crashes into the spaceship of Tree Trunks' weird alien family and starts to attack and brutally assimilate them. My god, woman, what have you wrought? And yeah, Tree Trunks stands up to Bubblegum and verbally berates her, and PB ignores her completely. But to be fair, I'd have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on if I didn't see it.
Keep your probes out of my star children.
Tree Trunks, you don't know what you're talking about.
And yeah, Tree Trunks starts a campaign against Bubblegum. How did they get away with this? And yeah, it's super surprising compared to her first episode, where her goodwill and naivety made her not see any evil in anyone. But now as a character, she's become much more standoffish and aggressive, and actively tries to go against authority as she thinks it's not working. And seen nowhere else when she joins up with the incredibly underused Veritas Brigade. Of course leading to...
Do you all have any guns?
Nope.
Was Tree Trunks planning to gun down the princess and banana guards? That would be awesome. Man, imagine if she acted this way in the first episode.
Ben can handle it. He's 12.
I think I know a way to help him out. Do you all have any guns?
But she uses the brigade cell to break into PB's compound, showing hundreds and hundreds of space probes she will infect the galaxy with. My god, woman, there is no end to your hubris! And yeah, we see just how horrifying one of these things are in a small area.
You're the devil's hot little helpers.
But she abducts PB in this frankly hilarious scene, and shows her the true evil of what she's done, and she is surprisingly moved enough to reverse it, somehow with the remote. Why is it shaped like Texas? Is it symbolic of the size of your god complex? But she then summarizes the entire episode.
What?
And literally, for the only time in the franchise, apologizes for her horrible actions.
I'm really sorry, Tree Trunks.
Okay, so now committing war crimes is apparently a bad thing. Who are you? You're not PB. Clearly this is another random lizard who took her place. I'm sure you could have justified it by saying this was somehow good for the Candy Kingdom, or more so for anyone who's not you.
I'm PB. I spy on everybody. No big D. You're cold, PB. You are a bad person.
Or maybe some morally gray bullshit the fandom makes up. PB is so worried about the demise of Ooh that she decides to send thousands of probes to colonize uninhabited planets to make multiple candy kingdoms in space. Which, honestly, I figure is a cover-up for it wanting to establish an intergalactic candy empire. So let me get this straight. You had thousands of probes of what seem to be like assimilatory beings you would just send into space with no way of surveying what they were doing, no seeming way of contact, no protocol in case they find native inhabitants or possibly interplanetary microbial infections, and just hoped it would all go well. PB, you are the smartest idiot ever!
You and I will never be friends, but we can respect each other's mothers.
No, Tree Trunks, don't give it to the dark side!
You were the chosen one! You said that you would destroy this and not join them!
So yeah, what the hell did I just watch? When I said Tree Trunks gets weird, I mean it. I don't understand the thought process with this episode at all. Maybe the writers were just getting bored with Tree Trunks and just want to make the most insane plot and story around them. I just can't with this episode. But in terms of Tree Trunks' development, we get, well, the obvious, somehow has a polyamorous relationship with aliens and spawn hybrid children that were never mentioned once before.
Don't be jealous of my alien consorts, Mr. Pig.
Who the slop is this?
But it also shows Tree Trunks at the height of her aggressive streak, actively calling out and even trying to sabotage Princess Bubblegum's operation, which is quite the development from how she was before and solidifies how much she's changed as a character. And also shows her romantic streak somehow got interstellar for no reason. Seriously, she scores in freaking outer space! Plus, it was literally the only time someone resents PB for her actions, calls her out, and she apologizes for it. I just wish the reason wasn't the dumbest thing possible. Okay, while that was probably the weirdest Tree Trunks episode, she does get one more starring episode. In freaking season 10. Yes, the shortest and last season with so much plot and conflict condensed into it, they used an entire episode on Tree Trunks lore. Why would you do that? Who asked for this? So much of the plot this season was underdeveloped, like Golb, who was literally the final antagonist in the show, barely getting any lore or information whatsoever, and an episode dedicated to him would have really helped, but no, Tree Trunks gets priority. The only way I can justify this is maybe the episode was already in production when the series was ending, so they had to do it. But okay, how is the episode? So we see Tree Trunks taking care of Sweet Pea, and it leads to honestly a pretty wholesome moment.
Yes, Sweet Pea, I'm the happiest mama in the whole world.
But soon after, Tree Trunks gets a call from one of her old exes. Yeah, remember them? Needs them to come back to their home kingdom, the Tiny Mammal Kingdom. Which actually does explain why she and so many other characters are so small relative to the species. So yeah, as I said, this is a Tree Trunks lore episode. And it flashes back to Tree Trunks after high school, acting all 50s or something, where she's super popular and achieved. While Tree Trunks wants to see the world, Randy proposes and she accepts. But then Tree Trunks immediately bails.
It's over, Randy. I'm a wild child.
Though Randy just called her now to get his ring back so he can propose to his girlfriend. So then Tree Trunks just became a pirate queen. Yes, really? Why the hell not at this point? Nothing's gonna top getting it on with aliens. But then meets her next husband, Danny, who does an Uno reverse and flirts with her, leading her to abandon her post and go off with him and get married. But soon finds out he was just using her to mutiny her ship, which she maroons him and then blows up her old ship. Yes, Tree Trunks has a body count. Yeah, there's no way this happened in the past considering her first appearance she didn't have a violent bone in her body. And then Tree Trunks uses her pirate money to venture into a massive shipping company as its CEO. You know, at this point, I'm convinced Tree Trunks is making all this up. And this is where she met Wyatt as her secretary, who's somehow even more pathetic in the past. It's also shown she was married by the King of Boo before and gave her money to him, which kind of explains a lot. Now, while it really does seem that Tree Trunks just can't handle commitment, it looks like the relationship with Wyatt lasted the longest, as she apparently aged horribly compared to everyone else. But yeah, eventually that had to end with her finally fed up with the man baby. But Wyatt had her ring. But Mr. Pig was following her the whole time, even Wyatt conveniently, as Randy can get his ring back. Though at least it does end with Tree Trunks reinforcing that, despite her past, she realizes how great of a life she has with her husband and Sweet Pea, and she wouldn't give it up for the world. Which again, is really sweet. But again, why does this episode exist? Not even just like in the season, but in general. Did we really need a Tree Trunks lore episode? Her story felt pretty established. And if anything, this contradicts it so much. This episode portrays Tree Trunks as an incredibly successful wild child who's a seasoned adventurer and skilled at virtually anything. There's no way all of that led to her in the first episode where she was nothing but sweet and naive about adventuring. It's one of the few times Adventure Time adding lore makes no sense. So yeah, we get this huge reveal of practically the entirety of Tree Trunks' life, but it adds virtually nothing, and if anything, doesn't correlate at all to her characteristics. It's clear at this point Tree Trunks has pretty much been the joke ridiculous character, where the writers would just find it fun to add this the zaniest stuff to her, regardless if it made any sense or not. Which does pretty much ruin any congruent characterization, which she surprisingly had for the most part until the later seasons. But yeah, this is the last main appearance of Tree Trunks in the series, aside from some shots in the final episode. But that's not it for Tree Trunks. As we get the conclusion of her story in the sequel series, Distant Lands, It's Together Again, which to me is one of the most mature and emotional things the franchise has put out, which is the conclusion of Finn and Jake's story, as they're all dead and in the afterlife, and Finn is looking to reunite with Jake after what seems to be decades, and work together to stop a threat to existence itself. But we see what became of a good chunk of Adventure Time characters, and we see that Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig both ended up in the 30th Death World, seeming to be a lovely paradise, akin to a blissful heaven where the two are still happy together, enjoying an afterlife of fun and relaxation. Now, after all the character discussion, in all of Tree Trunk's weird characterizations and reveals, does he deserve such a fate? And I'd actually say yes. I think Tree Trunk's maybe one of the unsung heroes of Ooh, for one good reason. Sweet Pea, the literal reincarnation of evil, was dropped on their doorstep, and she and her husband took them in and raised them as their own child. Not only just taking care of them, but comforting them as well when they get faced with their immense power they don't even know they have. And not only that, but teaching them about the joys of life, family, love, and everything that's the complete opposite of what the Lich stands for. And it's that love and compassion that helps Sweet Pea to become a good person himself. And even when the Lich returns in Ooh, in his parallel world body, and goads Sweet Pea into joining them to use their power to obliterate the world, Sweet Pea rejects it, and states that they are sweet as their name, and actively fights and defeats his evil persona. And it would never happen if he wasn't raised with such love by Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig. And despite the horrors of his own creation and his own being, we see Sweet Pea never gave in to such evil. In the finale, we see him desperately trying to save his family from Gulb's abominations, and then later, finally achieving the education he was tricked to avoiding. But even more, in our glimpse 1,000 years in the future, long after his parents were forgotten to time, he still is not given into the evil. Now is an actual giant, and wielding Finn's Night Sword, a sword created to seal and fight powerful evil himself, and possibly becoming a hero in his own regard. In all of this, because he was raised by parents who loved him and instilled such values in him. In a way, Tree Trunk's love makes her one of the most important characters in this show, and still is in effect 1,000 years in the future. And I think that's really special. Yeah, Tree Trunks as a character is quite a bag. You get a character who grows out of the sweet grandma character trope with more drastic characterization, development, and well, just plain weird stuff added to her. But honestly, I never quite understood Tree Trunk's development before I made this video. I just wanted to go on a deep dive of how insane Tree Trunk's stories went. But now after, I do have more an appreciation. Seeing Tree Trunks go from a sweet grandma naive with the true nature of the world to growing more of a backbone and biting back in her own way. And how much the love she gives affects others and fundamentally changes people. And yeah, in a weird way, it makes the bonkers stuff almost work, as well. Why don't you give a character who's just a sweet grandma just have the craziest stuff happen to them? It's hilarious. But despite all the crazy stuff that happens to her, I think Tree Trunk's characterization is surprisingly congruent. I mean, not as much as our main cast, but for a character who seems so throwaway to the point where they plan to unceremoniously kill her off in her first appearance, she's surprised there's a lot more to her than you think. And yeah, she might have a ton of weird scenes and her romantic tendencies do turn a lot of people off. But to me, she just has such charm in her attitude and how much she loves the other characters and how much they love her back. And I think a lot of that comes from her voice actress, Polly Lou Livingston. I can't imagine her without such an iconic voice, perfectly representing a sweet, soft-spoken, lovable grandma.
Oh no, I'm just a cute little elephant. I'm not cut out for adventuring.
But also such range with her intense outbursts, cynicism, and sass you never expect at first.
Ne'er-do-wells, they stole my apples. I'm gonna sass those boys up nasty.
And so much of her appeal comes from her performance. Unfortunately, if you don't know, she did pass away in January 2021, almost 3 years ago, in a few months before her final performance aired. And she left behind such an unforgettable performance that she really deserves to be praised for it. She brought the character to life with her charm and lovability, and perfectly bring across the warm, grandmotherly feel the character should have. And her contribution to Adventure Time as a whole should be appreciated far more than anything else I've said. And I want to say, thank you, Polly. We'll miss you.